So the other day I made a video talking about a potential Detroit Pistons lineup, and people seem to like that, so I don't know if you're going to like this one or not, but I'm going to make it and we'll see how it goes. If you do like these types of videos where I talk about what I think a lineup's going to look like for a team heading into next year and how I think those players are going to go in those certain positions, then let me know below with a like. Subscribe to the channel as well. I'm trying to hit 20k as soon as possible, so that would be much appreciated. But anyways, let's get into the lineup that I think the Dallas Mavericks are going to start the season with. And this is a team that I'm very high on. I've made quite a few videos on them talking about how I think they can be championship contenders and all of that. So I think this is a very key lineup and a very key team heading into next year. And the point guard position, yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's probably the best 21-year-old basketball player of all time, Luka Doncic. We'll put him in at point guard, so we'll start him there. Then off the bench, you've got Jalen Brunson, Trey Burke, and Tyrell Terry. Even JJ Barea now has been re-signed as well. He keeps on going. The GOAT that is JJ Barea, he's still around. Now, personally, I like Brunson, but I can see the case for Trey Burke because he was phenomenal in the bubble. He was probably their third best player during the bubble, during the playoffs, and that's saying something for a team that did pretty well. So you could see why he would have a case for being the first in line off the point guard position, considering Brunson's coming off a long-term injury, and Burke really came in and made a huge impact. But I think Burke can be pushed aside to the two, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But at the moment, we'll talk about Jalen Brunson, who I think comes off the bench. He does a lot of things you like. I'm a Jalen Brunson stan. Maybe I'm the only one in the whole world, but I really like what he does. I think he's an efficient guy. I think he's going to improve his three-point shot. He's going to do everything that he needs to do. He makes the right reads, and I expect him to start some games as well because Luka's going to sit some games. 72-game season. He's coming off an ankle injury. He's coming off a short turnaround. He's had all of these things happen. Every team's star player are going to sit 5 or 6 games, I imagine, at least. So Jalen Brunson's the guy that you would want starting. Maybe coming off the bench, you think Trey Burke can give a bit more explosiveness. He's more of a bench-type player, that Lou Will kind of mold. Really explosive, getting to the rim just to feel a scorer. But Brunson's got that high IQ, just a smart player, just a player I really like. And then you've got Tyrell Terry, JJ Barea. We'll talk about Terry a little bit because I really like him. Is he going to get a look in? I think there could be lineups where at times you have maybe Luka, Brunson, and Terry, because Luka's got the size where he can guard threes, and then you roll out something like that. Now that's experimental, and I'm not saying that's going to be something that happens all that much, but we might see that kind of thing. That's something that could be interesting. And I think Terry's going to get game time. It depends on how good he is defensively, how good his shooting is, and all those things. But at the moment, he'd be third in line. And then Barea, probably last in line, I'd say. And then we'll move to the shooting guard position, where the Dallas Mavericks probably got the biggest sleeper acquisition of the trade period. And that was Josh Richardson. It was all kind of in the absolute mess that was the free agency period and the draft that kind of meshed into one. And just Josh Richardson found his way to Dallas, the perfect fit, someone that was great in Miami. He didn't really have a great season in Philadelphia, considering some people thought he was Jimmy Butler light. Some people thought he was going to make the same kind of impact. Yeah, I heard that, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what Josh Richardson brings. That's defense. That's someone who can be a secondary, a third kind of playmaker. He can create some shots. His last year in Miami, he averaged around 4 assists and really started to elevate his game. Someone who could score off the dribble, someone who could play make for others, and that's why he was so promising coming to Philly. But that whole team was just a bit of a mess. It wasn't an ideal situation for anyone, particularly someone like Josh Richardson coming into his first year in a new organization and just having to deal with everything that was Philadelphia, just a whole mess. So he comes to Dallas, where he's going to be alongside Luka Doncic. He'll take the ball out of his hands a bit because they're going to need him to do a little bit of that. And then more importantly, he's going to provide great defense. He'll be a solid spot-up three-point shooter. He's a good mid-range shooter. He does a lot of things so well. He's going to start for sure. Fantastic acquisition. I'm really excited to see what he can do in Dallas. I think he could have a career year, which is saying something because he's been pretty good throughout his career. And this is where I think Trey Burke's going to come off the bench. I think him and Brunson can coexist, and I really like that relationship. You got kind of the high IQ of Brunson, the more slow-paced kind of guy who can make the right reads, who just continues to move the ball and do the right things, get to his spots. And then you've got Trey Burke, who can explode off the dribble, do these things, who can go for 30 when you don't expect it. That's the kind of thing you can get from Burke, and I think those guys can coexist. You've also got Josh Green, Tyrell Terry, as I mentioned, could play at the 1 or the 2 off the bench, and Josh Green, I think, is going to get some minutes. They picked him with the 18th pick, a big NBA-ready body, so I expect him to get some game time. Whether it's at the 2 or the 3, it's yet to be seen, but he's going to get some minutes as well. Now, moving on to the 3, it'll be Tim Hardaway Jr. Hardaway Jr. has gone from someone who I think was really inconsistent on the Knicks, at least maybe that was just my perception of him. I'm pretty sure he was very inconsistent on the Knicks, to someone much more consistent as a 3-and-D type guy for the Mavericks, really fulfills his role. He came in with a huge contract, and you're like, that's incredibly overpaid. Sure, he's still overpaid, but at the same time, he provides a real nice role, and I really like what he provides to this team, and I expect nothing less heading into next year. He's going to be a starter as well. There's a bit of a heap there with Richardson now, with Hardaway Jr., and with Dorian Finney-Smith, which we'll talk about. But for now, I've got Hardaway Jr., and I think everything he's done over the course of the last year in Dallas suggests he has to start, and he's a real impactful player for them. Someone who has gone from a bit of an inconsistent shooter to a really good catch-and-shoot 3 guy. Now, that's got a bit to do with the offense and Luka, but the reality is that's what he is, so that's good, and that's what Dallas need, and that's exactly what he's going to provide. Now, this is where the wing depth is. It's a bit of a cluster there. You've got James Johnson, you've got a newly acquired Wesley Owunzu, Dorian Finney-Smith, who I think is going to come off the bench, and I'll explain why for now. And then, like I mentioned, you've got Josh Green as well, who can play the 3. Any one of those guys, if Dorian Finney-Smith is the preferred 3 guy, he's going to be the first man off the bench. But if they choose to have him as the 4, then he'll be the first man off the bench there. But I think you've got the options, James Johnson, Wes Iwundu, all these guys can play a couple of different positions, and it'll be interesting to see. I don't really know. This is one of those things where you kind of have to wait and see. And as I alluded to, I don't think Dorian Finney-Smith is going to start at the 4. That's where I think Maxi Kleber is going to start, who I think had a really good playoffs, despite not really being able to score, and it's looking pretty woeful offensively. Defensively, he proved enough to me that if he can get his shooting back to where it was, which was solid, above average 3-point shooting, and then continue on that defense that he was providing, someone who was switching onto guys like Kawhi Leonard, and still getting cooked, but at the same time, he looked good while doing it. So maybe that's not a good thing. But no, he was staying close to him. I'm joking. He actually did a really good job. Like, he still got cooked, as I've said, but he did a good job guarding Kawhi Leonard. And if he can do that, then who's to say he can't guard any other 3s and 4s in the league? He's a versatile guy that I think is going to start at the 4. And the reason I've got Kleber at the 4 is because you're going to have one of Dwight Powell or Willie Cauley-Stein at the 5. Probably Cauley-Stein is in the lead at the moment just because Dwight Powell's coming off such a devastating injury. But as a player, Dwight Powell's definitely a better player. But I think Cauley-Stein might start the season there, and they might try to work Powell in coming off the bench. You've also got Bobby, the man himself, the per 36 monster, Taco Fall's biggest nemesis, the man himself, Bobby. So he's an option as well. He's not going to be a starter. I'm not saying that. Even James Johnson can play at the 5. He did that for Minnesota. Versatility is there for the Mavericks, and that's what I like about this team. But yeah, okay, let's talk about Dorian Finney-Smith and let's talk about Kristaps. Kristaps is injured, and I think the best 5-man lineup they can have is going to be Luka, Josh Richardson, Tim Hardaway Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith, and Kristaps. That's a small ball lineup though, and whether they choose to start that even when Kristaps comes back, because there's going to be a lot of banging down low, which they might not want him to do to prevent injuries, but in playoff time, when they need to get a bucket, when they need to get a stop, that's the lineup they're going to go to, and that's the lineup that I think is the reason I've got them in that title contention, because that's an incredibly dangerous lineup. But until Kristaps is back, I don't know if the small ball lineup is as effective, if you know what I mean. I think it might be better suited to go to a traditional lineup and then have Kleber at the 4 and then Cauley-Stein or Powell at the 5. And then when you get Kristaps back, if you choose to have him at the 5, then you can move in Dorian Finney-Smith, because I think it just works better that way, in my opinion. Or you could have Kristaps at the 4 and Powell at the 5. There's a few different options that Dallas have. As I've said, I think the 5-man lineup to start the season is going to be Luka Doncic, Josh Richardson, Tim Hardaway Jr., Maxi Kleber, and Willie Cauley-Stein, with potentially Dwight Powell, but I think the injury is probably going to prevent him from starting the season, so he might have to work his way into it. And then when Kristaps comes back, I would really like to see Dorian Finney-Smith and that small ball lineup that was so effective, and saw Kristaps break out in the second half of the season where he looked like the all-star player he can be. So I think they'll go back to that. But at the moment, I've got Kleber at the 4, I've got Cauley-Stein at the 5, and that's how I think the Dallas Mavericks are going to line up. Is it the best lineup in the NBA? No. But the reason I think they're so good is because of that versatility, is because they've still got a few unknowns in those rookies. We don't know how good Josh Richardson's going to play alongside Luka Doncic. We've seen how he's elevated players, his other role players, Trey Burke, Tim Hardaway Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith, Kristaps towards the end of the year. All of these guys have played better than they ever have before under Luka Doncic and under Rick Carlisle. So Richardson might elevate his game to another level. And if he does that, then he's a sub-all-star kind of guy. And that's huge for a team like Dallas. So if they get that out of him, then maybe their ceiling raises another level. But at the moment, I really like their death lineup, which I've talked about, and their starting five to start the season. It's going to be solid enough to keep them around that 6-3 seed. They'll still churn over wins as long as Luka's on the floor and as long as they've still got a pretty solid bench unit, which they do. But yeah, they're going to need Kristaps back, and that's going to be hopefully as soon as possible. If you did enjoy this type of video, if you do like me going through the lineups and letting you know my thoughts and what I think is going to happen, drop a like below, comment what you think the lineup should look like, what you think it will look like, how do you think it'll look like when Kristaps is back, all those things you want to talk about, that drop that in the comments below. I'll get back to you. Other than that, I'll catch you next time. Bye.